Janine, can I say something to you?
Yeah.
I would, if I can, if it's all right with you, I'd like to make an announcement about money and time at the beginning of the meeting. If I get, I know I have the money right, but if I get the time frame wrong, I'm going to ask you to confirm or not confirm. I think it'll take me about 30 seconds. I just would like the whole committee to be aware we're really cutting it close, you know? I know you're aware. I don't know that everybody is. Is that all right with you, Janine, if I do that?
I'm sure. Yeah.
I mean, I'm thinking I'm representing the board and we're about the money, so I need to talk about the money.
Right. No, I think that's I'm fine. And definitely, Kathy is the task force chair.
Okay.
I'll refer to her.
That's good, Mary.
It's good. Okay. I don't think it'll take me a minute, to be honest.
Yeah, that's good.
Okay. Thank you, Kathy.
Time and money are critical elements.
Yes, they are.
Everyone.
We don't want to waste it.
Sorry, I'm just shoveling in my dinner. It's pistachios.
I had almonds.
Yeah.
So,
I'm sorry, we're ready. YouTube is
Ready to go?
started and you're ready.
Okay. So whoever starts the meeting, Kathy, and then I'll make my little minute plea and off you go. Tell me when to go, Kathy.
yeah, Kathy should start the meeting.
Wait
Okay.
a minute, she went out. She's got to come back in.
Yeah.
Just give her a second.
Okay. And Rachel Griffith from CCPC has joined us as well to talk about the trail aspect. I just wanted you all to know, because I know sometimes it's hard to scroll through all of the people.
Yeah. Sorry about that. I hit leave meeting instead of got it. Maybe that was my finger may know more than my brain does. Okay, so let's start our meeting. I'm just going to go through the agenda. So I have an opening remark that I know Mary has a statement she'd like to make. Then we're going to go through a section about maps where we're going to compare what's in other comp plan maps in the area and then present some maps to the task force. And then we'll have a public comment section on that. That section will be about 20 minutes in length. Then at the end of that section, we'll move into review of the Campbellsville chapter. And then we'll conclude that review with a public comment on the Kimbellsville chapter. So I'll start with my comment first. First of all, I didn't get to look on Zoom here about who's in the room from the task force. I don't see that many people. Am I wrong? Hang on.
Those people are here.
Oh, there they are. Okay, sorry, my window. Okay, so yeah, Barry and Paul and Paul. Let's see.
Paul Overton, Dave is here. I didn't see Barry come in.
Talking. I don't see. Okay, well, we have a few members. So for the actual task force volunteers, I want to direct this comment to you and start off by saying I apologize to you guys that our the mapping process has been hijacked by activities and discussions that have occurred outside of the task force. I am interested in working collaboratively and productively with all of you to generate a high quality and future looking plan for our beautiful township, our neighbors, residents, and friends, which I count all of you as friends who live here. With regard to our first discussion about maps, we've allotted 20 minutes for the task force to see this presentation for the first time as a task force, and then to allow public comment. I will make sure that I commit to my fellow task force members that I will be responsible for maintaining this 20 minutes so that we can turn our attention to the other material that we need to review, which is the Campbellsville chapter. So I want to keep us on schedule, and that's my commitment to my task force colleagues. So thank you very much for letting me make that statement. I know, Mary, you have a statement that you'd like to make, and then I'll turn it over to Janine. Thank you, Barry. I can always count on you for those emojis. Right back at you, bud.
All right. Thank you, Kathy.
And I'll turn that to Janine after Mary. Then Janine, if you wouldn't mind starting the exercise around maps. Thank you.
Okay. All right. I'd just like to comment to the task force that this comprehensive plan started in April 2020, and we need to finish it by March 31st, 2022. The county has given us $43,246, and the township has put in $18,534. In round figures, about $62K. We have to get this done and on the shelf by March 31st, 2022, or we have to pay the county back. And of course, the township money would be wasted. And what we will be left holding is a 13-year-old comprehensive plan and $62,000 out the window. I don't want that to happen. Time is of the essence. And here's why I say that. We have 3 chapters to complete. We're going to do Kimbellsville and the trails tonight. And then I understand we have to do future land development and roads and community information structure. You stop me if I'm wrong, Janine, okay?
That's true.
So-
The 3 more chapters, Kimbellsville, then there's one on transportation and community infrastructure, and then there's one on future land use, correct?
Okay, so we'll get through 1 tonight, and then I was hoping we could get through 2 in August. I know that's questionable. September, we do not meet because the plan will be written in September. October, November, the task force will come back, have meetings, and review the plan. December, it goes to the PC to review and a public meeting. January and February, Chester County gets our plan, and so do neighboring municipalities to view it. And then March, it comes to the Board of Supervisors meeting to be approved, rejected, or delete whole chapters. You can't delete portions of a chapter. It's a whole chapter or nothing. And that takes us to the end of our limit. Otherwise, I want everyone to know how close we're cutting it, how much money is involved here. I don't want anyone to say, whoa, that current board, boy, they just wasted $62,000. I want everybody to be on board with this. So I guess when you speak, make sure what you're saying is really relevant, because we have to fly this along. Okay, that's my only comment.
Great. Thank you, Mary. All right, so on Mary's cue, let's not waste any time. Janine, want to walk us through the mapping?
I want to make one quick clarification, though, just so the expectations are clear. We had agreed as a task force a couple months ago to review a chapter a month. And I just want to make sure everybody knows next month will be transportation and community facilities. And then the month after will be the future land use, just to be clear about that. So I know Mary said to do both in August, but I just wanted to be clear about that. We switched the schedule around a little bit. Anyway, with no further ado, Rachel is going to run us through the trail mapping. I'm going to stop my screen share, and then Rachel will share her screen.
Hi, everyone. I'm never sure which one is screen 1 or screen 2. Let's try this. Can you see a trail map?
Yes.
Okay. So we wanted to share with you a few examples of comprehensive plans and how they handle trail maps, because there's a lot of different ways you can do it, and there's a number of different considerations. And before we go through these examples that we pull together, I'll say that in my experience and understanding, the trail map that appears in a comprehensive plan, when a comprehensive plan chooses to include a trail map, which is often these days, is usually a compilation of previous planning work that has been done. So like in East Bradford's case, they may have done a previous open space and recreation plan that they then took the results of that and put it in the comprehensive plan, or they just adopted that map as part of their comprehensive plan. Or, you know, they had studied, or if a municipality had studied a particular trail in more detail, and then put the results of that study on the map. And those studies and reports and plans usually have a significant amount of public input as a part of the planning process. And another route that is sometimes taken is there is a community charrette where people, as a part of the comprehensive planning process, will sort of identify generally the destinations within the municipality and nearby and where potential trails might go. And then those trails are shown in a more diagrammatic way. In most cases, in some cases, there's a railroad right of way. And so there's a clear path to get from one point to another. So those are kind of two different ways to approach trail mapping in comprehensive plans. And I think that a bunch of trail mapping has already been done by Franklin Township, and that has formed the current trail map that's in your comprehensive plan. So we'll get to that, but I wanted to show you some examples. So this is East Bradford's plan, and they have done a number of plans related to specific trails. And what I like about their map is they tie their comprehensive plan recommendations they color code them and tie them to the map. So it's, one of their recommendations is they want to complete the Brandywine Greenway, and that's in yellow. And so that's, this is the Brandywine Greenway. That's the piece that they want to do. So they have a really nice example. They also show pretty detailed information, including parcel boundaries and existing trails. And then this is London Grove's trail map. So their trail map is a little hard to read, but these thin red lines are the proposed lines. So they have pretty specific alignments for future trails. They don't designate like whether it's an on-road trail or it's or if it's a multi-use trail versus a hiking trail, but they do show specific alignments as well as existing sidewalks and existing trails. And then this is North Coventry Township's community facilities map. So they include a number of community facilities, including schools and sewer lines, as well as their trails. So they've got their existing trails as a solid line and proposed trails as a dashed line. And you can see that there's a decent amount of detail shown on these maps, but it still has sort of a conceptual feel to it. And then this is New Garden Township's trail map. So New Garden has done a ton of trail planning related to specific trails, as well as they have a greenways plan that they did 15 years ago, probably, that they're still working off of, that they have incorporated the recommendations map as part of their comprehensive plan. So a lot of study has gone into showing the specificity of these routes of existing and proposed trails in the township. But one thing I'll note that New Garden does is they have these big green arrows that show diagrammatically important connections that they want to make. So showing we want to connect these two developments to the Kennett Greenway, and we want to make these connections between Kennett Square and the borough and the Avondale borough. And then this is the map, the trails map that is in your current comprehensive plan. So this is the recreational resources plan, which includes natural resources as well as municipal open space, parks, and destinations. And it also includes existing trails as well as proposed trails. So this looks like the Spring Lawn Trail wasn't existing yet when this was done. But yeah, so this is the current plan. And then I showed a version of this map at the last meeting. So this is a potential way that you could show proposed trails in the township. And or this could also be included in conjunction with another trail map, but it's really intended to show the intent of the desired network. So it doesn't make any differentiation between existing and proposed trails. It's just showing the desired connections really between destinations. And it also starts to show a hierarchy between trails, that some that are more important regionally might be built to a multi-use standard, meaning they might be paved or gravel or ADA accessible, that sort of thing. And some might be these regional or local connectors, excuse me, that might just be, development roads, basically, with connectors between developments. So this is one potential way to show the intent for trails. And if you were to do something like this, it's hard to implement this, right? Because you don't really, if a development plan comes in, you don't really know, like, should we ask this developer to build part of the trail? Is this development even going to be on the proposed trail? So this is a great starting point, but it would really be the starting point for a future study, whether it's an open space and recreation plan that has a trails focus, or a specific greenways plan like New Garden Township did, a trail plan, something like that. And one of the recommendations that we talked about when we reviewed the text last month was creating a master plan for trails throughout the township. And then, so that this map shows a little bit more detail, but still not as much detail as some of the other maps that we looked at, that shows the blue lines show pedestrian friendly roads, which are pretty much just roads in residential developments that people already are walking on and feel comfortable walking on. And it also shows proposed trails in pink, and it shows existing trails in orange. And so you can start to see how networks form, and you have a little bit more idea of where that trail might be. So like I said, if a development proposal does come in, or if the township is looking to advance one of these projects, that you sort of know where the trail might be. So it gives you a little bit more detail for implementation purposes. So we're looking for some direction on what level of mapping you would like to see and you think would be most valuable to appear in your new and updated comprehensive plan.
So I'd like to open, thank you, Rachel. That was very helpful, and thank you for walking us through that for me and for the other task force members. So to the task force members who you're just seeing this for the first time, like Barry, for example, I'm sorry, I'm having a hard time with Zoom to see who's here in the room. But I just want to invite any kind of discussion from the task force around, how detailed should the plans be in the plan, or should the maps be in the plan? Sorry.
And also taking into account what Rachel showed you, it's in your current, comprehensive plan, just as a point of like a leaping off point, because that's your adopted policy right now, today. So just that's a solid point of reference for what the township has already accepted as an adopted, policy in the comprehensive plan. I'm not talking about the additional trail study that was done.
I guess I have a quick question. Are these trails marked in any way? Because some of them I know are special trails that are marked and designated. They're easy to follow. Is there, like, I don't know how to connect my reality of, look, this is the Fordham Trail versus what's on the map. So is it the Franklin Township's intent to mark these trails?
That's one of the recommendations in the text, Barry, about wayfinding signage and signage for existing trails. So that is, I don't believe all of them, I'm talking existing trails right now. I'm not talking about proposed, conceptual, anything. I don't believe all of them are,
that's a road.
Well marked, but yeah, that is a text recommendation that we talked about when we talked about the trail chapter. So yes, thank you. That's a good point.
And then a quick follow-up until somebody kicks in would be, are the pedestrian trails all paved? Is that a prerequisite for a pedestrian trail, an easy use trail?
No, definitely not. And I think most of your trails are not paved. And And you can establish trail design standards, and also definitions could be helpful so that it's kind of clear what the design standard is for each different trail.
And where is that done, Rachel? That those setting up those standards and making the decisions about signage and
I often see it in the subdivision ordinance.
And if you wanted a planning document to do that, Rachel had referenced that in the text portion of the trail chapter, there is a master planning, a plan for trails recommended. And then also there's the Mason-Dixon project that's a heritage interpretation and connectivity study. So that would get in a little bit into it, a little bit more into it. And you do have a feasibility study sitting in the back of your comprehensive plan right now that also gets into the weeds a little bit more. So those will be a couple implementation type of documents that you could use to flesh this out a little bit further.
okay. Thank you, Janine. I see Jerry and Chuck out there. Sorry, guys, I didn't mean to leave you out. I couldn't move my screen, couldn't find the button to move the attendees list. Do you guys have any comments?
No.
No. Chuck?
My only comment would be, it seems like at some point the horse got, the cart got put before the horse, and we were trying to study, and that was kind of taken away. But I'm happy with the plan, the third one down that we're showing. It could have more detail. The one we're looking at right now actually has more detail. You know, there definitely could. This is hard to implement. So, you know, from a planning board standpoint, it's hard to say, well, this, you know, that's what we were looking for, and that's what we were not looking for. But so that would be my comment.
Okay, thank you. So to try to reach a decision for the task force, I'm hearing support for the two maps that Rachel showed. This one that's showing on the screen right now, which I think have been referring to as the 10,000 level, 10,000 foot level, right? Map.
Yes.
And then if we can page up, yep. And then this more, 50,000 foot level, or, the Branson view, I guess Branson and Bezos view level from, up in the atmosphere, high up, conceptual. So these two maps seem consistent with what has been presented in some other comp plans and seem like a good move forward. Am I saying that correctly for the members of the task force that are on the call?
My only concern with the last map, which is the high detailed level, is, and I mentioned this in the email, like these trails are not maintained by Franklin. Some of them are not maintained.
Mm-hmm.
At that point, I'm like, should we show them? Should we not show them? Some of them are. They're tough. It's tough.
Barry, can I comment this, Paul? Could you show the legend, please? You see the dotted ones are proposed, so there is no trail there, right? So I'm not sure. Maybe you're referring to the ones in Strawbridge?
I kind of am, because they're literally just mowed paths at this point that are at the discretion of private people who kind of just do it.
Yeah.
So, and in fact, I don't think they're ideal. They're based on cropland truck paths versus recreational and nature use.
If I could suggest, this is not ever intended to be a hiking map where we post it in public. Like, it's not going to be on the front page of the website or posted in the right? You shouldn't be able to take this map and then go hiking. That's not the intent. And I dare say you would have no idea where to enter or exit or find a trail in this. You'd be lost. Right. The idea, though, is just what Chuck said. When the Planning Commission receives a subdivision plan and one of these proposed trails crosses it, the Planning Commission is able to tell the developer, hey, I'd like an east-west trail here, not a north-south trail, and that'll help us connect to this other development. That's the intent, right? So this will be like the last one, the last comp plan. It was on page 212 of the comp plan. It's a working document. It is not a public hiking map.
And one of our recommendations was to make a public hiking map too. So if you had one of those, I think people wouldn't look to the comp plan for it.
And we would never show a proposed trail on a public hiking map, right? That would be
Exactly.
not shown, only existing trails.
Okay, cool. And that's why I think that, like I mentioned, the disclaimer that, I know it says don't trespass, I think in the one that was passed around earlier, an additional disclaimer, just like fully flesh that out. These are not hiking trails, just so that because anything that's on the internet ends up anywhere you want it to, so. Okay, that's my only concern. Rachel, thank you for the presentation. I appreciate it.
Sure.
Yeah. All right. Is there any, Nan, who else is out there on the, because then it sounds like we're in agreement on these two maps and for the comp plan so that we could open it up to public comment. But I want to make sure that I give the members of the task force who are just seeing this information for the first time enough time to react and contribute. Everybody okay on the task force? Can you guys can help me look here, see if there's anybody popping up?
The only question, this is Chuck. The only question I would have is, we have two maps and sometimes conflicting information is the worst enemy. I'm not sure that the less detailed map is really giving us any additional information. And if it is, I'm missing that. So I would prefer to go with one. Being the more detailed one. I would think going with the less detailed one would not be acceptable, but this more detailed map I think is better than going with two. That's my comment.
Can you and I would agree with that. Like, I don't want the Jeff Bezos view from outer space. This one makes a little more sense to me, but.
Can you flip back to the less detailed map just for a moment? So I don't want to throw a wrench into this, but I'm wondering if both may be valuable because this map kind of, I don't know if the directionality or the connectivity with the arrows kind of shows you the concept of what we're trying to do. And then the 10,000 foot kind of shows like the nuts and bolts of what we might want to implement. Does that make sense? Right. So like, here's this big high level view of, oh, I see the concept and the logic of this trail system, and then the more detailed map kind of shows what the specificity of the trails would be.
That was the
or is
intent.
that too much?
No, I like both maps. I think both have their purpose, definitely.
Rachel, would there be any downside to having two maps? I mean, more information is better. I don't know.
I don't think so. I mean,
Okay.
I've sort of been thinking of this map that we're looking at now as almost like a smaller exhibit that could be used to describe the overall intent and vision for the trail network.
Right.
And then this map would sort of be like the standalone trails map.
I like it. I get lost in the weeds with the final map, but the other one helps clarify my general intent. Yeah.
I'm the same way, Barry. I kind of like both of them, and I like that high level. So
I do too. So that's three of us.
I'll go with that. I like the more detailed map, but if we can have two, let's have two maps.
But to Chuck's point, it's true that behind it, we just need to make sure that it's aligned and not have conflicting information, because that is the enemy of the good when things conflict, for sure. Okay. All right. So thank you everyone for that conversation. So we are, I've had a timer on here. We're right at 20 minutes, but I would like to close out this session by opening up to the public. And I would like to request that residents have the opportunity to speak first, and then have members from the Franklin Township government or if somebody from the comp plan task force wants to come back with more information. Let's do it that way. Let's give our residents the floor on any public comment with regard to the two maps that were displayed and sounds like they're going to be earmarked for inclusion into the comp plan.
Hi, I just want to ask a quick question and make sure that any neighborhoods or individual property owners that these trailheads or proposed trails could impact will be contacted and asked their opinions before these things were put into play.
Can I ask who's speaking, and are you a Franklin Township resident? Could you identify yourself? Thank you.
Sorry, Antia Consorto. I live in Brothers Riding.
So could I answer that? This is Paul.
Yeah, go ahead, Paul.
But yeah, I'm not sure what you mean by put into play, but it's
Well,
not.
before they exist, before the trails are decided upon, or before they're even discussed with other people, will they be discussed with the people that they impact first?
Yeah, certainly. We don't
The
have.
neighborhoods with more
most-
traffic and all of those concerns.
Yes, certainly. The majority of these trails are of proposed trails are on large parcels that have yet to be developed. So the idea is we can influence the development when it comes in. There's very few, if any, that cross a lot with an existing house on a small parcel. And of course, we can't just put a trail in without working with the neighbors and the landowners and things like that. There's no intent to come in and just put in a trail and not talk to anybody.
No, I understand that. I'm more concerned about, increased traffic if your neighborhood is right next to a trailhead. Parking issues, are there going to be parking issues? Safety issues as far as, strangers walking through the neighborhoods or whatever. If we increase the trail connectivity, that all comes into play as well.
Yep, and one thing to keep in mind is these are pretty small trails, frankly, where it's, as we can see in the other parts of the township where we have existing trails up in the north end mostly, people don't drive here from Newark or from Philadelphia or Wilmington to go hike in our trails, right? It's your neighbors. It's people want to just walk out of their door and take a little walk safely off of our roads because our roads are impossible to walk on. That's who uses the trail. It's your neighbors. It's highly unlikely you're going to get heavy traffic from strangers you don't know.
I think I can help with the question as well. There's 3 stars that go along that Stricklersville Road, which is near Brothers Riding, that say that they're trailheads. Those were put there as placeholders before we got the proposed trails in. Those trails now cross Stricklersville Road, one on the old bridge, one down further by Crossing Estates, and one down by Mount Olivet Road. So those aren't really trailheads, and I had asked for those to be removed, so we can remove those if that's what your concern is.
Yeah, that's a good idea, Nan. And one
They're not trailheads, they were placeholders for crossing of the trails over the road. Does that answer your question?
Yes, thank you.
Yeah, so we didn't have time to remove them. So those 3 red stars that are in a row there, but it says Big Elk section of the White Clay Creek Preserve will be removed because they were placeholders when the map was being made. You see it, Rachel? Remember, I had sent you an email.
Yeah, I see it. And my understanding was that was sort of places where coordination needed to happen with DCNR in order to allow access into the preserve.
Yeah,
But they're not really trailheads. It's not like
Right.
it's going to be a parking lot and you can park your car there and walk into Brothers Riding.
So one limiting factor is we show the trails that are currently there, but as somebody pointed out, they're just informal trails. Now that DCNR is taking over that part of the park, it's really up to them what trails and what parking areas they put in. We actually don't have control over it. We can maybe influence it, but we don't have control over what they put in their park.
Great. Thank you, Paul. I see another hand raised, Lynn Weber.
Hi, Lynn Weber. I live on Old Schoolhouse Road in Franklin Township. I have a few concerns. So if these trails are put near private property, isn't there going to be a liability to the landowner if somebody gets hurt on that property?
Do we have an expert who can talk about that?
I can say that Pennsylvania has a law on the books called the the Recreational Use of Land and Water Act, which basically shields landowners from any liability that they might incur as a result of opening their property to the public for any kind of recreational purpose. However, full disclosure, the law doesn't cover any legal fees, so anybody can sue you, right? But they won't win, but there would still be legal fees. So it offers some protection.
Right, but I don't think that's fair to the property owner to put them under that risk. And then
So I guess,
what happens if people want to drive ATVs or horses or bicycles on the property? And your property has to be adjacent to one of these trails? What happens?
so I have a question. Are we conflating a trail that's on private property versus a trail that is on public property near private property? So if somebody is so I live off of the Ford Farm Trail, and if someone is walking on the trail, runs into my yard and hurts themselves, you know, are they now trespassing on my private property when they shouldn't be, is my question.
Yes.
Right.
If the trail isn't on your property.
Right. So, and with Lynn's question, a trail near her property wouldn't impact her because they would be trespassing on her property if they were to leave the trail and enter her property.
If they knew they were trespassing, like I
Well,
would have to have
well, they
ample-
would have to know, like just because you don't know where you are doesn't mean you're not trespassing. Right. Like if I start wandering around your property and I say, oh, I'm not trespassing because I don't know where I am, I think you would still accuse me of trespassing, right?
Yeah, that happens. I think I think this line of, so thank you, Lynn, for that question.
Okay, I just have
you
one
have
more
another one?
question. Okay, so what he was saying about if they come up onto my property and they don't realize that they are, if you put a map out with a trail, and if that somebody else or me haven't given permission, then my property is listed on that map and people are going to use the map and they're going to walk there even though I haven't given permission.
Not if but I mean, my point is the trails won't be on your private property. Do you know what I'm saying? Like if the trail's on your private property, that's a problem. And whoever, the trail planners or whoever puts the trail in wouldn't be allowed to put a trail on your private property. But if it's on adjacent public land, then it's an adjacent public land. Right, just like, you know, if a neighbor puts a, you know, something on their private property, they're not infringing on your rights because it's not on your private property, right?
It should definitely, Lynn makes a good point, and it should definitely be very clearly marked if you're going to encourage use of a particular trail. It should be very clearly marked.
Oh, for sure.
It's close, especially if it's close, because some are on easements which are privately owned, you know, and publicly eased.
Yeah, it once again comes back to having good wayfinding.
Yeah, if I could make a comment, I think that we've got two things that we have to consider here. One are the existing trails, and the other one are the proposed trails. And the proposed trails are not going to go in without the public knowing about it and having the ability to comment on it, and the landowners would have to be involved. So I think that the concerns that are being raised are concerns that will be dealt with in the future if those trails, in fact, are on the active list by the Board of Supervisors.
Thank you, Jerry. That excellent, that it is future. This problem will be dealt with down the road. Lynn, do you have any other questions? Otherwise, I want to move on to Julie. And then I want to remind everybody, it is 7:08. I really want to wrap this up in the next couple of minutes so that we have plenty of time to have a thoughtful review of the next chapter. So Lynn, do you have any other questions?
Yeah, so I just wanted to ask how far along this was going to go before we got to look at it again and make any decisions. Like, what's the next step beyond this?
That's a great question. So these two maps with, it seems like a few edits that Rachel will make will be proposed for inclusion in the comp plan. Then, what happens with regard to making an actual trail, I defer to the Parks and the Pro Board or the Board of Supervisors for guidance on that. I have no idea, Lynn.
Okay. So I just have to keep watching at the meetings to know what's next. Okay.
No,
Thank
no,
you.
it's
Yeah.
when
Well,
a
go ahead.
parcel comes up for development. So if the parcel next to you is sold to Wilkinson, then you should be concerned. That's when a trail would go in.
Okay.
Great. And Lynn, I had this comment, so to end the public comment, but I'll put it now to attach it to what you just said. For anyone who is passionate about this topic, I would encourage you to participate in the pro subcommittee or follow their what they do so that you are not surprised by any movements. That's what I would encourage anyone who's on this call who's passionate about what is on a trail map and how does it get there. I would then follow the Board of Supervisors minutes and especially the pro subcommittee. So Julie, I want to get to you. Julie, what's your question?
I didn't have a question. I just had a comment. Thank you, Kathy, for making that suggestion of getting involved, and thank you everyone for the work in this presentation. And I just want to say I really do appreciate the two forms of maps, because I think the more bird's eye view shows how this community can potentially interact with other nearby townships, and I think the detailed version is also really helpful. And I really appreciate Mary Walker's point about just making a clarification and making very clear that these are not trail maps and these are planning. I think that's potentially for people who actually do delve in deeply into township internet, it's a potential selling point to show that this community is willing to preserve green space and also intersect our communities with paths that connect each other. So thank you.
Thanks, Julie. And then I see somebody named Hutchings with their hand up.
Yes, just I'm a property owner in Franklin Township. I live on Flint Hill Road on a farm just south of Nickel Park. And the only comment I have is there's no S. You have Nichols Park. It is Nickel Park.
Noted.
I love it. Thank
Okay.
you. Thank you for in that levity and accuracy.
It's out of our township.
I know. Thank you. Okay, I see John's hand. Yep, go ahead, John.
Let me just make sure I unmute here. I have just a few short comments. I think the concern that I had and many property owners had is that we were going to delineate few proposed trails on private property, and that generates some security and privacy issues. Looking at the two maps that you've adopted tonight, they're entirely acceptable. They don't show partial boundaries, so I don't think we are compromising anybody's privacy or security there. The only other comment, I did read the trail mapping agenda, and there's something on there about generating a subgroup to work on trails. Is that meeting going to be public? This subgroup that we've established or will establish?
So I think it already happened. This was Janine and Rachel. And then I know that Nan did some GPS tracking. So I don't know if a subgroup is what I ever called it. It was just people who were working on getting more information onto the map. As far as the task force, and Janine helped me out here. I don't know if any other subgroup or sub team will be commissioned on anything actually from the comprehensive planning task force between now and when the plan is written.
It was only called a subgroup, John, and everybody else, because that's what the name, I believe, was. We talked about this in either the prior task force meeting, meaning this meeting a month ago, or the month prior to that. I can't remember. And what happened is a trail map was presented and people on the task force and otherwise started to point out that there were some inaccuracies with the map. And at that public meeting, everybody decided, why don't certain people that understood those inaccuracies go back and take a further look at the map and correct the inaccuracies, so we're not effectively wasting people's time at a public meeting, showing, inaccurate information that we didn't know, being the consultants, was inaccurate information. So the subgroup word may have been a little bit too much, but it's basically what was being talked about at that meeting. So we just wanted to try to use, the same terminology so people wouldn't be confused. And other comprehensive plans I've worked on, those types of groups do happen because the nature of a comprehensive plan is usually no more than a 2-year process. If it starts to get longer than that, so much changes in a community that you almost have to go back and start over with the policy. So to vet very specific items in a comprehensive plan, because there simply isn't time at a task force meeting, it is very typical for other comprehensive plans I've worked on and other communities in Chester County have completed, to have people who are on the task force or like the pro board or maybe the township manager, those sorts of folks who have that very specific information, just go through and vet things quickly and correct, just wrong information. So then when the chapter, the map, whatever it is, comes before the task force, at least the factual information is sitting, in that document. So that is the explanation behind that, the subgroup wording.
All right, my only comment going forward is if there is a subgroup developed to further work on these trails, that it needs to be public. It's a fairly controversial issue and concerning the many property owners. So any of that discussion or development needs to be public.
Okay. Any other comment from the group?
I think Jerry seems to have a comment.
That might have been, his hand might still be hanging out from the.
Okay.
Yeah, and
This is Andy Martin. My apologies. I'm a Microsoft Teams guy, so I don't see the hand anywhere. But so I live in Brothers Riding as well, where there would be an entrance on the proposed trail that comes off of the backside or north side of Brothers Riding. So I want to propose a best practice. I've spent a lot of time on the Lewis Georgetown Trail. It's a converted railroad spur that runs all the way from Georgetown all the way to a chemical plant down near the Lewis Beach. And I'm going to point out 3 things that I've really learned when I heard about this project and what I've seen with the Louisville Georgetown Trail. One is parking is in designated areas, and people that join a trail do not park in a neighborhood. And if you know that trail, you park in a designated area that's already been well documented. It has garbage cans, it has some degree of police coverage, and it has some cameras that I don't know where they are, but I know they're there. And if we choose not to do the garbage cans, the police, the cameras, then you don't allow parking because it can be a site where there can be some issues. And I just think it's a very good best practice. So if you, it sounds like some of the folks that have talked know about trails real well, know about what needs to be done, but that one's done very well. And I would not recommend any parking in a neighborhood. That's my big takeaway comment there. And then the second item I had is at the very beginning of this, and I'm just joining this meeting for the first time, there was a comment made that, we're under the gun. There's timing around the availability of the funding, and then it runs out if we don't use it. And I wanted to ask a broader question that you can take offline if you want, but I would like to get an answer to it. And that's how does this priority rank compared to other priorities for the township? And can someone talk to that?
The priority of the comp plan, Andy?
Of this plan that we're talking about tonight, addition of newer trails, et cetera. How did this become a fairly high priority compared to some of the other things that the townships probably prioritized?
Can I comment on that, Andy? I'm Mary McVeigh. I'm the chair of the board. when Dave Gerstenhaber and I ran for office, one of our priorities was updating the comp plan because it is the vision of our residents and the board serves for what the residents want. So it did have a high priority along with many others. But that's what we're working on now. But yeah, it has a very high priority because we want to know what our residents want. And we sent out the survey, and the number one thing our residents want are walking trails. Now, these maps are great. It's proposed. Will it ever happen? We don't know. I think I get concerned that people are worried about a trail going through their backyard, and it may never happen. These are just ideas that when the time comes and the property changes hands or whatever happens, we say, hey, that would be nice if we had a trail here or there to connect with an existing trail. And then we all sit down at the table and talk. Nobody is forcing anything on anyone. I just feel this has gone. I don't want property owners to feel the board is making a decision. The bulldozer will be there tomorrow. Get ready. That is not the way this would work. You own your land. You're entitled to your land. And if you don't want a trail, you don't have a trail. Plain and simple. I mean, I feel the same way, but it is a high priority because our residents have told us trails are a high priority. So yeah, we're working real hard on this. I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, it's a start. I'm new to a lot of the township stuff because like a lot of folks, I haven't often don't have the time for it, but I do appreciate the feedback and look forward to how this kind of rolls out as we go forward.
Thank you. Thank you. So I'm just
add one thing real quickly. Andy, this is one of 6 sections of the comprehensive plan. So the comprehensive plan isn't just about trails. So you can check in with me or with Kathy if you want to know what the other sections are, because I know we're trying to move on.
Well, and you're welcome to stay for the next section, which is Kimbellsville, Andy.
Exactly.
So thank you for teeing up the transition from maps into the next chapter. And if you're welcome to stay and go into that. So thank you everyone for your collaboration on this piece. And let's, Janine, without further ado, let's move right into the Campbellsville chapter. Okay.
Okay. So we have about an hour to talk about this. So what this is there was a robust public process. I'll just run through that really quickly for everybody who's new to this. And that process started last year. There was a community survey that was sent out to property owner, or that was online, I'm sorry. And there was a postcard sent out to property owners by the township. And we got a pretty good response rate for that survey. Then there was also a community workshop last September that was held where property owners attended and provided us feedback in breakout groups. So we got some good feedback there. Based on all the public input, we then as a task force chose priority subject areas because that is how this particular comprehensive plan was set up in terms of the scope of work. And based on that, there were 6 priority areas chosen. So then we interviewed people specific to those priority subject areas. So for example, Kimbellsville, we interviewed property owners, businesses, residents, et cetera, in Kimbellsville. We had one on ag retention. So we interviewed agricultural property owners to try to find out a little bit more information. And then earlier this year, I believe it was in January, we had another public meeting where we again presented where we were in the process and got public feedback of where we were in the process. And at that point, we presented draft recommendations. We presented the 6 priority subject areas, and then we presented draft recommendations. So what we're doing now is we're going through the chapters for the priority subject areas, and we've already been through 3 of the subject areas in prior months. This is the 4th subject area, and then coming up in the next 2 months, we have 2 more priority subject areas. So based on survey and other community feedback, Kimbellsville Village and what the future of the village was going to be was considered a top priority, and the notion of having village enhancements was considered a top priority to retain the village character, the historic village character and what it is as a village, but to make improvements and enhancements to it to continue having it, or to have it be a robust village and also have vitality as a village, including economic vitality. So with that being said, during the process as well, a vision was created, which is what you're seeing in blue. And this vision was vetted at that public meeting in January for what the vision that's driving the entire comprehensive plan is. And how it works is we have this vision available for every chapter we write so that the chapter speaks to the vision and speaks to also the community input that's happened throughout the process. So this is the vision that this entire chapter and the other priority subject chapters, the other 5 of them, are speaking to. And then the goal of this particular priority subject is written here. And again, this is based on the vision and the public input and also the comprehensive task force input. And so I want to check in with the task force now to make sure this seems like the correct goal for this particular priority subject area if you want to provide feedback. Now, and again, this feedback right now is directed to the comprehensive plan task force. Kathy, as she said, at the end of this, the task force having their feedback, then there will be a time for public feedback where everybody can comment, on the chapter. So does anybody have any input on this particular goal for Kimbellsville Village?
Hello.
Hutchings, Kathy, how do you want to answer a non-task force member providing input now?
Yeah, Mr. Hutchings, you said your first name and I can't remember it. I'm
Bill.
sorry.
Bill.
Bill, if you don't mind just waiting until the task force.
Oh, I'm sorry.
That's all right. That's all right. Keep it, write it down. Don't lose that train of thought. Keep it.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yep, no problem.
Does anybody on the task force have any comments about the goal? And if not, I'm going to move on to the next sections. So how we structure each of these chapters, again, for people that are new to the meeting, is we try to keep the chapters short. If you notice there's other planning documents where wording goes on and on and on and on, and not all the wording maybe is to the point. So we're trying to keep this to the point as possible. And so what we do is we have a section of background information in all the chapters, basically saying to people reading this, why is this a priority area and what does this even mean? And so the first thing we do is we run through community input. And so you have a couple paragraphs here on what the community input was to get us to this priority subject area. We talk about Kimbellsville in general, then we talk about the community survey findings and what we found through the community survey. Then we start to go through survey respondents. I'm going to make this, hold on a second there. Survey respondents, then what they specifically said about different aspects of Kimbellsville. So for example, one of the survey questions is, if you have commercial uses and you have additional commercial uses coming in to Kimbellsville, what would be the preference on where, or I'm sorry, if you have additional commercial uses coming into the township, what would be the preferences on where those commercial uses would be? And the survey results were along Major Road and in or near Kimbellsville and using the smaller, possibly mixed use pattern facing roads and with parking in the back. So that was 64% of survey respondents, for example, said that specific finding. So the first part of this chapter just runs through what all of the findings were in the survey. We continue through that. And then we also talk about input at community workshops. And one of the big things we found was that attracting and retaining small business and that large retailer strip malls would really detract from the rural character of Franklin overall, including in Kimbellsville. And there was also community input about the need for some kind of overall branding for Kimbellsville and really reinforcing it was a village. And the branding would be to help retain current businesses, attract new businesses, foster economic vitality, as I was saying before. And then the survey even got into details of what type of detailed businesses you would want in Kimbellsville. And people were interested in redevelopment of the gas station, adding a restaurant, adding a specialty food store as some of the main community input. There was other there was other input that we talk about, but those were some of the big things people were interested in. Does anybody have any questions about that before I move on? Anybody on the task force?
If you could just scroll back up again.
I made it a little bit bigger because last time everybody was saying the 100% wasn't big enough. So it's at 120%. So you can't see as much.
Awesome. Thank you. Yeah, there they are, like the bike shops and takeout food. Yep. I forget, is there a farmer's market in this section or?
We talked about the farmer's market in the community workshop in September. Right. A farmer's market was talked about. Yeah, that's why there's no percentages for a farmer's market, I don't think, because
it wasn't in the survey. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, because it wasn't, we focused more on almost like permanent uses, rentable buildings as opposed to those types of events.
Something transient,
yeah, something that would be more transient. Yeah, we tried to focus on more permanent. But yes, we did get community input on that. Okay. And it's talked about further down.
Okay.
So moving on, and I hope I'm not making anybody dizzy scrolling. So then we talk about context, and what we do is in context, we look at Chester County overall, and then we look at the larger region around Franklin to just talk about the general context, what's going on, different villages that are in the county comprehensive plan, which is called Landscapes 3. We talk about how it does include villages and how villages are part of the significant historic character of the county in general, and also as part of the township. Certainly the village, Kimbellsville, is a significant part of Franklin's identity. Then we go on and we talk about heritage tourism as an economic driver in Pennsylvania, and go into a little bit about that, because this whole idea of branding that came up in the public process was really to help the agricultural properties, help really people to understand where some of the preserves are. And again, as was mentioned in the prior discussion, there was a big emphasis from community input on trails and a pedestrian network, including a bicycling network, on how to maybe come to Kimbellsville, park your car, grab a bite to eat, go to the winery, and then maybe walk or cycle to some of the other agricultural destinations, or maybe one of the preserves, or maybe, Township Park, or even maybe further down, into Fairhill, and how to do that all from possibly a bicycle or walking, as well as maybe from, a vehicular standpoint, single vehicles. So we went into talking about that, and then talk about how it's well placed in proximity to, regional commercial uses, historic places, recreation, et cetera. And then we named the other chapters where those other topic areas are talked about. Does anybody have any questions on that regional viewpoint? Then the next part of the chapter then goes into existing conditions. And what that means is now we're honing into Franklin Township. And what are the existing conditions in Kimbellsville, specifically in Franklin Township? So we talked about the rural character of Franklin Township, and you'll notice the theme of this entire comprehensive plan is how to preserve that rural character. That was an overriding, definite item that residents, property owners, et cetera, who participated in the public process wanted. Throughout all of the various public process we did, we heard over and over again, maintain the rural character, maintain the open character, build connectivity between the different resources, maintain natural resources, maintain our agricultural landscape. So you'll notice even in Kimbellsville, that is a theme, because what Kimbellsville provides is it provides a village and a traditional town center, kind of township center crossroads that really connects all of these other natural resources. And back in the day, it was almost like the market that, agricultural properties could go to, et cetera. And there was a definite interest in the community input about having it as a gathering place and kind of getting back to Kimbellsville's roots as, again, a crossroads, and also as a community center, again, connecting residents, property owners, and then all the other items that I already mentioned. Here in the existing conditions, we do notice that Kimbellsville is historic, and that has been acknowledged through a National Register eligible historic district. And there is also a local historic district. There is a historical commission in the township, and there is also an architectural review board that is in a portion of Kimbellsville that looks at the architecture at Kimbellsville to maintain that village character. And both of those have been in existence for a while. We also note the uses that are in Kimbellsville. There's some mixture of uses in the village. Community input was very strong, saying this mixture of uses could be enhanced, and that a mixed use pattern in the village would be okay with those that answered or provided input. And we do note that in general, a mixed use pattern is typical for villages. It's a traditional pattern for villages. It's a historic pattern for villages. And it also provides that economic health and, vitality where you have that live work environment where you have people living in the village and occupying the small businesses in the village. So we go into that a little bit. And then we also talk about how Kimbellsville currently is not walkable, but there definitely is a desire for Kimbellsville to become walkable. And a little bit about how that could occur. We're going to talk in the recommendations about how that could occur and how that could be done in kind of in concert with this whole branding idea and this whole kind of looking at the heritage interpretation and what the heritage of the village is. Are there any questions about that before we move on to recommendations and actions?
As Paul, just kind of a reminder that, this is kind of our vision, what types of shops might be there or walkable, but, it's really up to the business owners, what stores they put in there and what might be successful is up to them, right? We can't force them. Like we can't say we want a bike shop and we don't want your bakery or whatever.
Right.
But this is our vision, and then the idea that we try to market it and get people to come and use the stores that are there the buildings that are there to make it a walkable, livable community center.
Correct.
And one last point is that the Mason-Dixon plan with the multiple townships working together and Kimbellsville being a focal point would help us with that, would help us get on the map, so to speak, as the group looks at the highlights for the 4 townships that are involved. Kimbellsville definitely is a highlight.
That's correct. And Paul brings up a really good point that this plan isn't dictating saying there will be a bike shop, there will be a bakery. It's saying that residents and property owners who were surveyed had interest in having those types of uses. And that's interesting, of interest to the township as a whole, because now people have spoken saying, hey, we wouldn't mind having a restaurant here. We would actually like having a restaurant here. We would like having a specialty food store. If one doesn't come in and somebody decides that another use is more appropriate, let's say an art shop is more appropriate, then, so be it. But at least the residents have provided input about the type of businesses that they would like to frequent in the village. So thank you for that, Paul.
Our job is to make sure that the township has the planning and zoning to allow for those things. That's what we're doing.
Right. So moving on to recommendations and actions. So the recommendations, as I said, were discussed at that January public meeting. And then based on those recommendations, then we look at what are very specific actions that would get us to implement that recommendation. So in every chapter, we write the recommendation that again was looked at that January meeting. And these recommendations came directly out of the public process. And then we have a little description on, well, who cares? Basically, who cares? Why are we doing this recommendation? Why is it important to us? And so we have a little description, a couple paragraphs, no more than a couple paragraphs, keep it simple, about why this is important. And basically the first recommendation was this whole branding concept I came up with, the community process came up with, and promoting Kimbellsville Village by rebranding the village as a walkable agritourism and trail open space and recreation destination gateway and community center. So then we described why is this important? And you can certainly peruse this and read this for yourself. But basically why it's important, number one, is because the community thought it was important. And number two, it really checks a lot of the boxes that we heard through community feedback, which is how do we build some kind of small scale, little e, little d economic development and certainly economic vitality in the township, with Kimbellsville being the natural focus as a village that already has some of the infrastructures between having a major road like 896 and also some shops there now, and certainly some historic buildings that are close together. So that means it has already the residents and basically the people living locally that could potentially frequent other businesses, the wineries there. So there's definitely assets and amenities already in the village. So how do you take those assets and amenities and really turn them into something that creates the village as a community center, a gathering spot, and really as we heard in the feedback, really this word destination and gateway for the township. Those words kept being repeated, and that's why you're seeing them in the recommendation. So this would really be to showcase Kimbellsville Village for what it is, what it was, what it could be, and basing it all really on heritage interpretation and the fact that Franklin is, and residents and property owners desire to continue to be, a rural community that does have local farm products and does have open space and does have recreation and does have a lot of these, assets. Does anybody have any questions on that before I move on to specific actions? I'll scroll up a little bit so you can read the whole. And again, I want to emphasize to provide a locally oriented and appropriate scaled economic development vitality to Franklin. That's compatible with this whole idea of Franklin as a rural place.
Yep.
So how in the world do we do this? How do we implement this recommendation? And the first idea that was generated was, how about we look at a village master plan? And that village master plan would look at branding, looking at the historic village character, historic resources, and also looking at that local historic district that I mentioned. And there is also an inventory of historic resources that has been done that's called the Township Historic Resources Atlas. And that has been done township-wide, not just in Kimbellsville, but looking at those tools that are already in place and are already being used to a certain extent. So then what we do here with these bullet points is we say, okay, we have this action. Now, how do we implement this action? And these bullet points basically provide either to-do steps or they provide support information about the action and kind of an explanation of the action. So we go on to talk about how Kimbellsville is a unique destination, how effective branding could really get to the village sense of place, how this master plan could be the planning document and it would go through a public process on what that would look like in terms of village branding. As we write here, walkability, what types of land uses would be appropriate. I know we talked about the bike shop and the specialty food store, but it would really be vetted more in that process, where parking would be appropriate, how you do some traffic calming so to help the walkability with 896 going through the village. And then really the wayfinding signage. Somebody mentioned earlier about signage for the trails. And is there signage for existing trails? Well, there's also assets in Kimbellsville that it could be signed a little bit better so that people can find the assets a little bit more easily, and potentially future businesses and the farmers market that, Kathy had mentioned, et cetera. All of that could be put together. And how do you brand Kimbellsville Village as this destination? And then there's this other concept that I mentioned earlier, that there is a regional proposal for a Mason-Dixon Art Corner Heritage Interpretation and Connectivity Plan. And as Paul had mentioned, Kimbellsville Village, through this comprehensive plan process, would be at the center of that the plan. It's a regional plan proposal along with New Garden Township, London Burton Township, and possibly Elk Township is now involved. And Franklin Township would really be the keystone between, all of the townships and connecting what's going on also a little bit in Fair Hill and the equestrian nature of Fair Hill that is growing. So vetting that through a regional process and looking at how Kimbellsville and this village plan then would fit into the regional, process, and really doing this through the heritage of Kimbellsville and the heritage of Franklin Township overall. Then the next action would be participate in this regional Mason-Dixon Arc Corner Heritage Plan. There was a presentation already before the Board of Supervisors, I believe that was last week, where the proposal, the draft proposal executive summary was presented to the Board of Supervisors. That has already happened before New Garden Township, and that has already happened before London Burton Township as well. Elk Township, I think that's going to be happening next week to try to see if the townships are interested in possibly taking this next step. This next step would be an implementation step. And just like we had that trail mapping conversation about what is comprehensive plan policy, and I think we used the word 50 or 30,000 feet, then we got down to 10,000 feet. So comprehensive plan policy is at 30,000 feet, 10,000 feet. Once you get into an implementation project, whether it be a village master plan, whether it be this sort of, plan, now we're starting to dip down a little bit further. And these types of projects would have a very dedicated scope. The comprehensive plan, again, talks about many different subject areas, from transportation to historic resources, to natural resources, to trails, to Kimbellsville. But these plans would have a very dedicated, very narrow focus, relatively speaking, and really start to get down into the weeds a little bit closer to that, I'm going to say 10,000 foot and below level. So that is another concept that was proposed here. And this just goes on to talk about how that would work. Then there was the idea to hold a community charrette for branding ideas around the two themes, agritourism, and then this whole recreation destination. The township already has a number of preserves and parks in place. And of course, what isn't township parks, there are other parks in place. We talked about the Strawbridge property, the Big Elk portion of the White Clay Creek. And then there's also the Peacedale Preserve. And then Fair Hill, of course, is to the south. And then we have the whole White Clay Creek Preserve and White Clay Creek State Park if we're moving over to the east. The Big Elk also goes into Elk Township, that preserve land. And then if you're traveling north, New Garden has a number of areas that you saw on the New Garden Trail map. There's also a number of properties that are preserved and some parks and a trail system. So this is really a community, charrette to look at the village, should say master plan, to look at a village master plan and to look at really branding ideas and to also look at other villages. We named a couple, Marshallton. We've talked a lot about Marshallton throughout this process, and maybe St. Peter's Village and Guthriesville. Guthriesville has done a master plan, for example, as a point of comparison. And then moving on, there was definite interest in Chester County Villages and Town Tours program has been going on for 20 years. It is a free walking tour program of both villages and towns, and also some hamlets and rural areas throughout the county. And there was also interest in a community workshop. It was raised that this sort of thing is done in Newcastle County, and then also Chester County's Village Walks program was talked about. And there was interest in seeing if there could be a Kimbellsville walking tour to really have residents and property owners understand the historic nature of the village, the assets that are already in Franklin Township, and to call attention to those, the buildings, the historic character, the history of the township, and you really have people more pride in the community and embrace the history of the community, including, for example, the walking tour probably wouldn't go to these areas, but there are markers that note the Mason-Dixon line in the township and in the other adjacent townships. And those markers are listed also on the National Register of Historic Places. So Franklin does have a lot of history, a lot of agriculturally based history, and also other history that this walking tour could really bring out for people. And then local businesses that are open, for example, the pizza shop, the winery. If there's additional people in Kimbellsville, certainly that helps bring attention to the local businesses, and again, local economic development kind of to enhance those businesses and maybe invite other businesses to want to come into Kimbellsville. There's a number of historic buildings in Kimbellsville, as I've been saying, and adaptive reuse of those buildings for other types of, modern, economically viable uses is certainly could be an outcome of this comprehensive plan as an implementation. And then here, Kathy, we have the farmers market action. We heard this loud and clear to create a farmers market in Kimbellsville Village and to really form a group of Naga agricultural business owners and other community members to talk about how that farmers market could take place, and to look at some of the other farmers markets in the county and how they function, how they got their startup, and how they continue to function successfully. And then also the county has a great resource called the Agricultural Development Council, and that resource is specifically set up for the economic development of agriculture in the county. So they would be a good resource to look to for creating something like a farmer's market or any type of agricultural economic vitality boosting projects. And then last but not least, under this branding recommendation is the idea of establishing wayfinding signs for Kimbellsville. This idea, again, was brought up in an earlier action, but this is the full on action item. And this would really be vetted through that master planning process. There was very specific input saying that the 1723 winery can be difficult to locate, and that wayfinding signage could really assist in that, and also the whole agritourism aspect of helping that business entity. Are there any questions about branding, the actions, or anything I've gone over before we move on to the next recommendation? And we're still doing okay for time at 7:51.
Yep.
So if there's no questions.
I have a question, Lynn Weber. What is meant by traffic calming? Is that like traffic lights?
There's a number of things that could be meant by traffic calming. So it could be all the way from traffic lights, which would be a most extreme, to stop signs, to bump outs of curbs, so that it automatically, the visualization is that the road is a little bit narrower. And so traffic automatically slows down when the road's narrow. It also could create, when you do bump outs of curbs, it can also create on-street parking to a certain extent. There's also speed humps that are possibilities. There's signs there's creating crosswalks, and then there's signs that you put in the crosswalks, the flashing lights at crosswalks to alert people, to alert vehicles that pedestrians or bicycles are crossing. So there's a number of different opportunities for traffic calming measures.
And then would the community, the people that live there, work there, would they be able to help to decide what is used for traffic calming?
Janine, let's push this one off, because if I could comment that PennDOT has studied that for years, and that's way beyond the scope of this group. Like 896 safety survey or safety plan is been going on for years. It's said it's on PennDOT's radar. They're going to do a few intersections at a time, and that's way beyond us.
Okay, because I mean, every time you build something or put a new business in, that's going to change everything.
Yeah. So, but I might even venture to say you might have missed your ability to input and give feedback to what PennDOT has planned. That's a state road.
Yeah, it's a state road. And as Paul said, that process has been going on for much longer than the comprehensive plan. I don't even know the time frame of it. I hadn't been involved in that, but the changes to 896 have been going on for a while.
Yeah, I was just saying if we bring businesses in, that's going to change the landscape as well.
Right.
And it's just going to change the look of the community if you start putting flashing lights and traffic lights and everything in. So, okay.
Are there any other comments? And I want to emphasize comments from task force members first. Does anybody else have anything?
I think we should probably just move on, and so we can get to the comments at the end of the sections.
Okay, thank you, Nan. Kathy had to step away for a minute. Nan is the second task force chair. So historic resources, this was a second recommendation, and out of the public process came the recommendation to encourage maintenance and continued integrity of the village historic resources and character. Obviously, a focal point of Kimbellsville is historic resources, and that's evidenced by the National Register Historic District and the fact it is a historic village. It has been a historic village for a very long time, and it is surrounded by recreation, agricultural opportunities, etc. And all of those together really create the rural character that is Franklin Township. So the first action item was to look at developing a graphic design guideline for Kimbellsville as a local historic district. Currently in the township code, there is text that talks about the design guidelines. How a local historic district works in a nutshell is there is text in an ordinance, and there is generally a graphic element of the ordinance, and that graphic element should be vetted at this point and created to help property owners and businesses understand what the wording of the ordinance is saying, basically translate the ordinance into graphics. Then preparing a National Register listing nomination for Kimbellsville. Currently, as I was saying, the district is an eligible district. That's the first step in the process of National Register eligibility. And there was interest in taking the next step, which is to have full listing. And what that does is basically it opens up the possibility of other types of possible funding, and depending, there's certain levels of tax incentives that are available if a historic resource itself, or if a district is fully nominated to the National Register. So continue to keep the village as a local historic district and consider other options for the protection and adaptive reuse. So moving on again, talk a little bit more about how enabling legislation for historic resource protection works in Pennsylvania, and then go into considering reviewing some of the historic district standards periodically. And then also there was interest in some of the feedback about looking at the rest of the township as well, and the other historic resources in the township, understanding that the township's rural character is not just about the open land and not just about the ag land, it's the intersection of the ag land with those historic buildings. And there was discussion about how people pass through the historic, buildings, farmsteads, et cetera, properties, and don't really see them until they're gone. And that's happened in a lot of other communities where suddenly a historic building 2, 3, 4 are demolished, and then the whole character of the township or the municipality really changes, and can change pretty quickly. So to get ahead of that curve, there was interest in looking at other possibilities for how to preserve historic resources, including adaptive reuse, which I talked a good amount already. Then, is there any comments about historic resources before I move on? I know Kathy wants me to keep moving on, and we're almost at 8 o'clock. Should I just move on, Kathy, to the last recommendation?
Yeah.
So the last recommendation was this concept of walkability and traffic calming. I know I've already mentioned this in a couple other recommendations. And remember, recommendations for a place like Kimbellsville, which is a relatively small land area, are going to all overlap a little bit. So walkability and traffic calming, there was definitely interest in calming traffic in Kimbellsville, and also trying to make it a more walkable village center, more in the traditional standpoint of not so much, nobody was interested in sidewalks per se, but some kind of walking paths, linkages between some of the buildings, and more investigation of how that could happen. This comprehensive plan process, remember I said, is at this 30,000 level, 30,000 foot level, 10,000 foot level. So getting into very specific details about how that was going to happen is not reasonable for this comprehensive plan process. What is reasonable about talking about the policy and maybe talking in generalities, like you saw with the trail map, about how that could happen. And so here you're seeing the written policy of some of the ideas: slow traffic. Obviously, if you're going to create a walkable situation, then traffic should be slowed for the safety of everybody. And that has happened in a couple other villages. Marshallton was one that kept coming up as an example. Years ago, Marshallton had no pedestrian facilities. And probably about 10 years back, Marshallton had village planning that occurred, and now there's pedestrian facilities in Marshallton, and it's definitely a very walkable village, and there's on-street parking, and it really changed the nature of the village, and also helped a couple of the businesses that are currently in the village, as a couple of the restaurants. Now people can actually walk there from their homes in the village rather than having to drive there and take up another parking space, in the restaurants. So talking about the traffic calming measures, we've already talked a little bit about that. And then how to address parking to promote more visitation to the village and the businesses. And there was definitely interested in looking at the parking standards and ordinances, making sure there's maximum flexibility. For example, having some shared parking situation, and then also maybe considering some kind of parking study for the village. This would be a further down the road, probably planning process that would happen after a village master plan, but just an action item idea. There was definitely talk, and this is my understanding is this discussion point has been going on for quite a while, well before the comprehensive plan, about how to make 896 a less desirable truck route in order to preserve Kimbellsville character. And then there's also neighboring municipalities that would like to preserve some of their rural areas, and they're interested in how to do the same thing in their municipalities, make 896 less of a truck route. Then next is identify and implement improvements for walking and biking at priority locations. And again, how to have this pedestrian walkway within the village. And the village master plan, which would be an implementation project in a public process, would vet this. Also that regional Mason-Dixon trail, or Mason-Dixon, Arc Corner Heritage Interpretation Connectivity Plan, in partnership with the other communities, would start to drill down a little bit further past the 10,000 foot level, not the level of a village plan, which would really get into the details, but a little bit further into how you would make Kimbellsville Village as this destination kind of heritage center idea, gateway for the township, how you would connect it to other areas in the immediate region that would be assets to Kimbellsville businesses, and maybe adaptive reuse of some of the historic resources. So then we end the chapter with relationship to the township vision, because we always want to come back to the vision. That is what's driving this plan. And then we have many resources with web links in each of the chapters on where you can go to learn more about some of these items. So Kathy, do you want to take it from here? If the task force has public comment, or if anybody has any questions or input.
This was, thank you, Janine. This one feels really good, strong. There's a lot of detail in here. I don't have any comments.
No comment.
Thank you. I think that was Jerry. Is that you, Jerry?
Jerry.
I'm sorry, who just yelled at no comment? I couldn't see where the light was on the.
Do any task force members have any comments, I guess, first?
Nope, none for me. We've been through this a few times, so.
Yeah.
We've been through this a couple of times, so yeah. Public comment, all the public, all the meetings. So yeah.
Oh, Mary's gonna sing. No.
What was that?
This is Chuck. I did have just one small item. You mentioned in the middle, and I'm not sure whether it was documented, that we were not necessarily looking for sidewalks. I think that's community-wide, but I think Kimbellsville sidewalks will be a consideration in many situations. I don't know that we're going to be able to do something other than a sidewalk and make it work. So I just would say we shouldn't be saying no sidewalks.
Yeah. Put sidewalks in front of all the houses.
Yeah, hang on. So Joan or Jeff, this person is the repeater. I feel like it's my little brother when he was 9, just repeating.
I'm trying to find out who it is, but it's.
I'd just like to comment as so that the residents know and the committee knows, the board is actively working on traffic calming on many streets. It's a problem in our township, in many townships. It's going to be an ongoing, but we're working with PennDOT, LTAP, and we're trying very, very hard to make people slow down. So just so residents know, and if you have concerns, contact the office, the board. We're working on it. I'd just like people to know that. Thank you.
I want to address the comment quickly about sidewalks. I said that based on the community input, and based on the community input, the wording is pedestrian walkways. That's not particularly necessarily ruling out sidewalks, but I was just sharing what the background information, because we're not at the level of choosing what walkways means. The task force actually, along with the community input, decided it was probably best to use more generalized term walkways, so that sidewalks could be part of that, or other forms of pedestrian connections could be part of that as well.
Yes, thank you. I just want a clarification on that. Thank you.
I have a couple of public comments. I'm not sure. I'm going to try to keep it brief. I think the vision is good. It's a well-developed plan. Hopefully Franklin Township can implement it fully. Just to answer Chuck's comment about sidewalks, I think they're necessary, although there isn't any physical space. One way you could accommodate it is to convert Appleton Road to a one-way street, and then you would have room for sidewalks on each side. Currently, the township, the village is pretty well developed. You have daycare, you got medical offices, you got auto, you got Daddy-O's Gourmet Restaurant, a first-class restaurant with great food. You have other food services. You got a gas and convenience mart, you got a charter school and a winery. So you've got some elements of the village already. Mm-hmm. There is one economic negative that many people may not understand, and that's related to the tax difference between Pennsylvania and Delaware. Pennsylvania has a 6% sales tax and Delaware has a 0%. So we're very close to Delaware. So if you look at Franklin Township and London Britton Township, there are very few commercial businesses that develop in London Britton or Franklin, because most people, or a large number of people in Franklin and London Britton, work in Delaware. They're down there every day. They do their shopping down there. So a retail business has got a real struggle up here selling a retail item at 6% above the cost of what you can get 8 miles down the road in Newark. So I think that's a significant obstacle for commercial businesses. What we do have up here is a lot of food service, and we have a lot of auto repair business. And auto repair business is taxable, and you wonder why that particular business is so prevalent in lower townships, Franklin and London Britton. It's primarily because Pennsylvania requires a state inspection on all cars. So those auto repair stations provide that inspection service. If that wasn't there, I would think most of that auto repair business would be in Newark. So that is a an economic obstacle to anything that develops in the lower townships, London, Britain, Franklin. If you look further north and in London, Britain, and particularly in Penn, commercial businesses flourish because they're farther away from Delaware. It's not so convenient for people that live up there to run into Delaware. So that's a significant obstacle to any consumer-oriented development in Franklin.
Great, thank you, John. Dawn, I see your hand is raised.
Hi, I'd like to say, can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Okay, I want to say I'm so proud of you guys because I worked 26 years with the Brandywine Conservancy. I know Sheila Fleming personally. The Mason-Dixon project is phenomenal. And I was a member of the Chester County Conference and Visitor Bureau for 20 years. I was on the board, and they did the village tours and town talks in Oxford. This is a super beginning for our township. I am so proud of you guys, and I want you to keep going, and anything I can do to help, I just think it's phenomenal.
Great. Thank you, Dawn. Thank you. Paul, I see your hand.
Okay, sorry, I needed to unmute. I have a couple quick comments. I thought this was pretty comprehensive and I'm really quite impressed with it. But on the first page of this chapter, it talks about in the first paragraph under community input. I happened to notice that our neighbors in London, Britain were missing from the list of local townships, and I didn't know if there's a reason for that or not.
It's primarily because it says nearby commercial and residential areas. There really aren't, I mean, there's no commercial in London, Britain, and there's really not that much residential in London, Britain,
well,
relatively speaking.
It is a strip mall, but they do have one commercial area. They do have plenty of residential. Anyway, that was my question concerning that.
Yeah. It wasn't, it's not like the other communities, I guess is why it was left out. It's like Elk doesn't have as much residential as New Garden.
Right.
You know, Elk and London, Britain, and really you all, and then you look at some of the other communities, it's not really the same level of commercial or residential is why that was done. But anyway, sorry, go on.
No, I mean, that's interesting. For clarity, this might benefit then from something that said nearby denser commercial and residential areas. Because to me, that's what you just expressed. And that does clarify it for me, or some other words, whatever. There was a mention on page 2 of the redevelopment of the gas station. The gas station actually has reopened. The comment may have been based on someone's sense of a period of time when it wasn't open, unless there was a desire to see something else there. I'm not sure we really want to suggest that about a business owner.
That was directly from the survey.
Okay.
So survey comments actually and public comments actually came back, and I think that was from public comments. There were a number of public comments in the input process. I think it was in the workshop, if I'm remembering correctly, where people wanted to see the gas station redeveloped, and I would say the word enhanced. Okay. So even if it remained a gas station, to have some kind of more villagey aspect of it. And then there was definitely discussion, and you all correct me because I mean, you're obviously there and I'm not as you are, but there was discussion about how the gas stations seemed to be opening and closing, and people weren't sure if it was a stable business. Anyway, the community workshop, there was a lot of talk about that gas station. Maybe it's more of a context of how to make it more, for lack of a better term, how to make it fit into the village character a little bit more.
Okay,
does that seem appropriate?
No, I mean, you explained why it's in there. I was in one of those breakout groups, but obviously not in all of them, and so I'm not necessarily aware of what people were talking about. The other thing I would suggest just saying from the village and wineries, we've got more than 2 wineries locally. That's on page 3, and it's the 5th paragraph down. I think.
We only have one in the village. This is the village chapter.
Well, no, it says not far from the village and 2 wineries. So either we're going with one or we're just talking about wineries. That's all. I understand your point, Paul. I wasn't sure where that was.
What we're talking about is an agritourism destination. So naming the winery in the village is good, but then we have to name what the other agricultural destinations are, or the agritourism destination, and certainly the other winery, Paradox, is a possibility. I mean, there's other wineries. There's the cidery in Elk. There's the winery to the north, just outside of Franklin. But I think it's fair because Paradox isn't really that far from the village and not in the village. It's also the agritourism component is why it was in there.
Yeah, but don't we have Patron also not just about the same distance away? That was.
Yeah, we do.
Yeah.
If you're going to justify Paradox, you have to put Patron in.
And then Croots Creek isn't too far past that. They're all.
Yeah.
And I think Borderlands closed.
Yeah, Borderlands is closed. Anyway, I would just suggest wineries. I wouldn't enumerate them. That's all.
Okay.
And then the other thing that I would note is you are talking about bringing in stop signs and other options as traffic calming. And this was an earlier discussion. And so I would just like to point out, and Paul is right, that ship to some degree has sailed. There was a public meeting at a Board of Supervisors meeting where PennDOT came and talked, and actually there was a fair amount of community input. We are going to get stop signs in the village. We are going to get a limited form of crosswalk if PennDOT holds to its plans. And we are probably going to get gateways on 896.
We can
so
just
these things
that,
are
the 896 study binder is in the township office for anybody who wants to go look at it.
Yeah, but Paul, this post states that this is basically PennDOT's improvement project that has been looming on the horizon for a fair number of years now. And there were public discussions at the supervisors meeting. I don't even know how many years ago that was. I think it's a couple. So some of this is beyond, it's on the drawing board, and the drawings have reality. They're plans.
Would it be appropriate then for me to ask Paul Lagasse, since we have different Pauls here, to give a little bit more information for this section, so we can just say, for example, in the improvement process, the improvement project, these sort of improvements have been or going to happen or have been proposed. Is that okay with everybody?
Yeah, I have a couple of comments, Janine. I met with PennDOT over the years related to this project. The project is to convert the intersection into a 3-way stop. And as part of that project, we got PennDOT to agree to some crosswalks that would allow people to cross 896 in the village in various locations. And that project was supposed to be completed in 2017, and they moved it to 2020. But at some point, I believe it will be done. But PennDOT did agree to the crosswalks that Paul alluded to, which do supersede what was in a study many years ago. So it's in the books right now. We do have PennDOT's agreement that they would provide those crosswalks, which will be beneficial to the village. I think we probably ought to document that somewhere. I have to go back through the records and find all that data, but it's there somewhere. Just another comment related to the gas station. That the reason the gas station up here have a difficult time is because of the difference in taxes on gas in Pennsylvania versus Delaware. I mean, gas in Delaware is somewhere around 20 to 25 cents a gallon cheaper in Delaware. So since many people do live in Delaware, that's where they buy their gas. So gas station up here, although they're struggling, are able to make some money. They're in business, but it's a tough business considering that differential cost.
Okay. So I think I don't see any other hands raised who hasn't already spoken. I think we're probably at the end of the public comment. Janine, you want to wrap this up?
Yes, thank you. So we will investigate trying to fill in a little bit more information with information that Paul, Lagasse, and John get to me to flesh out this paragraph a little bit more. So then next month, we will be coming back with a priority subject chapter that is focused on transportation, meaning vehicular, car-oriented transportation, roadways, and then also community infrastructure. And that will get into things like stormwater and those sorts of topics. I may have other people from CCPC coming to join us. Thank you to Rachel again for being here and helping so much on the trail aspect. She is our trail and our open space planner in the office, so that was really appreciated, her working with us on this. I have a couple other people in the office who specialize in roadways, vehicular circulation, and then also in community infrastructure, who are helping pull together specific action items under the recommendations for the chapter next month. So same time next month at 6:30, we will talk about that chapter. I don't know if there's anything else, any other questions, Kathy, or anybody else?
We'll get a copy of the chapter out to the group in advance so we could pick up any of those edits, right, if we need to. We'll still do the same.
Right, the task force, yeah.
Yep, to the task force, great.
Yeah.
Okay.
Can we get a little bit before? I mean, this time it showed up on late Friday, maybe early Friday or late Thursday before the meeting, just to give us some time to get through it and get the comments back to you.
Yes, we will try to.
I appreciate that. Thank you.
So, Janine, this is Paul on the last thing you have highlighted there, PennDOT improvement project. Maybe not detail what's in it so much. It's fine to say a few things, improvements and crosswalks. Maybe just reference it because it's changing all the time. They're they're delayed all the time. Just reference it that we need to keep up with that and keep in contact with PennDOT and make sure we're involved in any improvements, things like that.
Okay, that makes sense, because if it's changing all the time, why would we document it in here?
Yeah, because this is a 10-year document, right? So it's no use listing what the plan was.
Okay, sounds good. Well, thank you all very much.
Thank you, everyone. Have a wonderful month. I hope people get away, go on vacation, relax, have a good time.
Yes, have a good rest of your evening.